Hello and welcome to the online edition of Cloud Security London. Unfortunately, we can't be back in person again just yet, so we're here online again from my house, Steve's house, and we have some awesome presenters dialing in from their house as well, don't we, Steve?
Yes, we do, and we have quite an international setup today. So we have a few people joining us from some quite fancy locations. So good to have another opportunity, whilst we're all virtual, to bring some international speakers to you at this event.
Lovely, yeah, exactly. So before we kick off with the talks, which is what you're all here for, just a little bit of housekeeping. So in the chat, feel free to ask any questions and fire them in there. All of our speakers are ready and raring to go to answer your questions that you've got about some of the content they're going to deliver this evening. Ask them in there, and if we don't get to it during the talk, we will get to it at the end. So don't worry about that. Just let us know in there. We know when we're in person, we have a great community and we get together and we chat and we socialize a lot. So let's try and keep the chat bubbling as well, and we'll be chucking a few things in there. In terms of the agenda tonight, we've got the Tale of Two Clouds. So we've got a talk that's going to be on AWS security first, and then we've got a talk that's going to be on Azure security and compliance second. So we're giving you an opportunity to understand that from two different lenses. All of our speakers this evening come from an awesome company. They all work for a company called Contino. They're all working all super technical, working with clients every single day with some of their challenges, so sharing some of their experience and some of their stories. So they're drawing on real world knowledge and experience to share with you. And then, of course, it wouldn't be Cloud Security London without our quiz. So stick around to the end to the quiz. And Steve's in charge of, it's that way. Steve's in charge of giveaways. So Steve will let you know what the prizes are going to be tonight if you stick around.
Yeah, are we selling the prizes now, or are we waiting to? People have to wait to find out.
We can tell people what they are now, can't we?
All right. Well, I've been a bit lazy, to be honest. I've oversimplified it a bit. Instead of picking specific prizes for you that we will order from Amazon and ship to you, we are going to give a £50 voucher to the first place, a £30 voucher to the second place, and a £20 voucher to the third place. So for Amazon, and we may be able to do that in dollars or euros if you're somewhere else. That we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So finally, just before we introduce our first speakers, thank you to our sponsors, Sumo Logic and Infosys, who help us make this possible and help us with the giveaways and those kind of things. So really happy to have them supporting us as always for these events. So have we missed anything, Dean, or we
just one final reminder, which I know everybody is always fully aware of, but just the kind of code of conduct, just very quickly, verbally. This is a nice, friendly environment. Let's be nice. Let's not be toxic. Good vibes only.
Good stuff. Worth mentioning, of course. So our first talk is on AWS security and compliance. We are going to bring Jason Lutz and Thomas Benken into the stream just in a second. As Dean mentioned, both of these guys work for Contino and are experts in the AWS space, working in the DevOps area around lots of experience around cloud solutions architecture, and they're going to talk about security and compliance in regards to the account owner side of the shared responsibility model. But I know they've got a great session lined up for you, so I won't steal too much of their thunder. We'll just dive away, and we'll let the speakers in now to introduce themselves.
Hi guys, thank you for that introduction. Can you hear us okay?
Hello everyone.
Hello, can you hear me okay? This is Jason Lutz.
Yeah, it looks like we're good, Jason. The comments are popping up.
Excellent. Excellent. So my name is Jason Lutz, and we're going to talk about AWS cloud governance and security. So let me go over to the agenda here. Do bear with me. I am having some latency issues calling from the United States, Phoenix, Arizona, and Thomas is out of Florida. So if I do continue to experience latency issues, I'll go ahead and shut down my webcam to see if that helps with the performance here. But basically on the agenda, we're going to do some introductions, Thomas and myself. Then I'm going to move on to compliance and governance at the enterprise level, talk about how an enterprise should really approach cloud security and the frameworks that should be used and the things that need to be looked for to ensure that there's no gaps within their cloud security program. We're also going to talk about cloud service provider and account security. So I'm going to walk through some of the tools that AWS provides to address security issues. And I'm going to compare it to a particular framework that we're using in the United States called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And then if we have time, we're going to pull in a demo of a project that we're working on that basically feeds an API connection to SQS, kicking off automation so that guardrails are provisioned within AWS accounts. So if we have time, we'll get to a demo on that. So moving forward, my name is Jason Lutz. I have a traditional security background, and what I mean by that is basically working at security operations centers in my past, being a systems administrator for a data center of a local government here in Phoenix, Arizona. Then moving on to things like data loss prevention for a financial company, risk management for a large financial company, as well as maintaining an ISO 27001 security program for a SaaS service provider, in which we were basically using resources within AWS to provide each one of our clients an isolated instance of our software to the client. So a lot of information around there around being a SaaS provider. I have some information about that we'll cover in some of the frameworks. I also wanted to mention I do have security certs within AWS, Alibaba, and GCP. Azure, still working on that. That's a different beast to me. I also have certifications around security, such as the ISACA CISA, the CSIM, the CGUITE, which is a governance certification, as well as CRISC, which is a risk management certification. With that, I'll pass it on to Thomas to introduce himself.
Awesome. Yeah, my name is Thomas Binkin. I work at Contino as a senior consultant. My workspace is mostly in Azure and its integration with AWS, and as a security underpinning, so like AD support and things like that. I do have a few cloud certs in Azure and GCP, and that's all I have for me. Back to you, Jason.
Okay. So moving on, just establishes some baselines, and I understand this is a security-oriented group, so this is probably running over some things that are probably already understood, but just to set some baselines here. So we're going to be talking a little bit about governance, compliance, security controls, and guardrails. So what is governance? I thought I'd just kind of run through this, a set of processes that ensure data assets are formally managed throughout the enterprise. So every large enterprise is going to have governance to ensure that their IT assets are properly managed, as well as their IT security is properly managed. So compliance, that means ensuring that the organization is complying to a minimum of the security-related requirements. So every organization, depending on what field of work they are in, financial, healthcare, and so on, are going to need to meet their compliance to demonstrate that they are implementing the right security processes and controls to work in that industry. So those compliance requirements should be reflected within each enterprise's security standards and policies, and their compliance measurements should be against those security controls that are enforcing those policies. So talking about security controls and guardrails, just a generic discussion of what security controls are. Security controls are safeguards and countermeasures to avoid, detect, counteract, or minimize security risks to information, computer systems, or other assets. So the difference here between security controls and guardrails are basically security controls that are put in place that constantly watch your deployment in your environment and watch for deviations on those baselines of your security controls. So guardrails are a popular term nowadays, and we're seeing that a lot with our clients that are enterprise clients that have a large number of AWS accounts, and they want to ensure that certain security controls are in place with the accounts are provisioned and that they don't deviate, or that the entities within the AWS accounts, the member accounts, cannot alter those guardrails so that it knocks all of their AWS accounts out of compliance. So this is just my opinion, but my opinion around the whole enterprise security compliance area going down to the cloud security program and going down to the network security is like layers. So your enterprise has to have a security program in place, and they have to have security frameworks to ensure that they're compliant with the security controls that they need to be demonstrating to their auditors or regulators or so on. So generally, an enterprise will basically have a security program in place, as well as a framework selected that they can measure their control effectiveness. A lot of large enterprises also have a cloud security program. So taking those security guys that specialize within the cloud, like AWS, GCP, and Azure, or others, and ensuring that the watchful eyes are there and doing the checks on all of the accounts that are established, for example, within AWS, and ensuring that those controls are effective. Another use or reason for a cloud security program may be to vet vendors that are using cloud service providers. So if you bring on a SaaS, looking at their security hygiene or their security processes or their security controls to ensure that they meet your vendor requirements that your enterprise has stipulated within their security standards. And then when you get down to the core of it, it's down to the workload and network security. So we talked a little bit about the shared responsibility model was mentioned. We'll talk a little bit about that just to cover our basis. But your workloads, your EC2 instances, your containers, they all have security that is involved, and the client or the customer of the cloud provider is responsible for that, as well as the network security. So your security groups, NACLs, and security devices such as firewalls and API gateways. Things that can contribute to your security posture management, tools like, I'll try to be agnostic in our discussions, but tools like Dome9, Prisma, those check your AWS accounts against certain compliance or frameworks or benchmarks, and they'll basically give you a compliance readout or a dashboard so that you can initiate your remediation of your cloud accounts. And workloads could have things like OSSec or Twistlock, which is now owned by Prisma, or Aqua, to check the security of those workloads, such as containers. So moving on, I'm sure that we've all seen this diagram or this graphic, but we should run through it anyways. The AWS shared responsibility model. So basically, there's a saying that basically says AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. So they're talking about all the data centers, all of the hardware, and all the software that's running the infrastructure that AWS provides the services on. So they're responsible for the security, the maintenance of compute, storage, database, and networking below the hypervisor level. They're also responsible for maintaining all the data centers, and that's one of the great benefits of using a cloud service provider is the redundancy, the business continuity aspects of using a cloud service provider. So AWS maintaining regions, availability zones, and edge locations. So the customer, as we know, the customer is responsible for the data that they put into the cloud. So things like the operating systems, the network devices that they put into the cloud, such as security groups, routes, NACLs, and so on, and firewalls. Those are all the responsibility of the client because they're putting those in the cloud and they're configuring those within the cloud. And then ensuring that all your data is properly encrypted and so on. Moving on. So one thing I'd like to mention, since we're talking about compliance and governance, is the Cloud Security Alliance. This is a group that specializes in determining the security controls needed to properly and securely put data into the cloud or move resources into the cloud. And there's a great document that they have out there called the Cloud Control Matrix. So as you can see, and I won't read down through the whole list, but this is basically a framework that you could check against to ensure that your enterprise is addressing each one of these security domains so that you're properly doing things at the enterprise level to ensure that your cloud instances or your resources that have been provisioned to the cloud are secure. So there's 16 domains. Again, I won't read them all, but some of these absolutely make sense. Application interface security, data center security. So again, that's pushed on to the cloud provider. Encryption key management, those are the things that the client is responsible for, governance and risk management, and so on. These are all the responsibilities that an enterprise has to ensure that these controls are in place. One of the interesting things about the CCM is they've done all the mappings for you. So if you're mapping against the ISO 27001, NIST 800, FedRAMP, PCI DSS, or HIPAA standards or frameworks, they map those domains for you so that you can map those to whatever your risk management groups or your audit groups are looking for in your environment or within your enterprise. So I'm going to switch gears real quick and go to the CCM itself just to take a quick look at this. So here you can see the CCM, again, has all the domains that an enterprise is responsible for securing. So I won't go through this in too much detail, time permitting, but for example, the very first control, application interface security. So the question here is, are your applications and programming interfaces designed, developed, and tested in accordance with leading industry standards, OWASP? And do they adhere to applicable legal, statutory, or regulatory compliance obligations? So that would be a security control that framework is calling for. If I scroll over here, you could see that all the other frameworks that are out there globally are pretty much mapped to. So you can see FedRAMP, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and so on. So you can map those controls to that. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but an interesting supplemental document to this, and it's very hard to say, is called the Consensus Assessment Questionnaire and Initiative Questionnaire, and that's called the CIQ. So this is really great if you're involved, especially with vetting out your vendors that are in the cloud or using against your own deployments within the cloud. But basically that one control that we just talked about application and programming interface security, you can ask yourself these questions here. Do you use industry standards such as BSIMM, NIST, and other frameworks to build in security in your software development lifecycle? You could judge the maturity of either your enterprise or the vendor that you're bringing on board as a SaaS application. Do you use automated source code? Do you use manual source code analysis, and so on? So these are some of the checks that you could do to basically assess the security within your enterprise in regards to cloud. So dealing with some latency issues, I'm coming back to my slides. So now let's talk about your security controls. And a very popular security control or framework within the United States is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And the NIST Cybersecurity Framework actually uses administrative controls and technical controls. So you can select, for example, ISO administrative controls and apply something like the CIS Top 20 security controls. And the NIST CSF frameworks has different functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And those are mapped to the NIST 800 controls within this table. And so again, an eye chart, and I won't read through it completely, but identify has things like asset management. Protect has things like protective technologies and active access controls. Detect anomalies, looking for anomalies, events. Respond, response planning, recovery, recovering, and communications, and so on. One of the reasons I bring up the NIST CSF is because I've seen quite a bit of information coming from Amazon where they align the services that they provide, the security services they provide, with the NIST CSF. So for example, Amazon discusses having Security Hub, organizations, control tower, trusted advisor, service catalog, config, and systems managers as addressing the identify piece of the NIST cybersecurity control framework. Another example, in protect, things like Direct Connect, Resource Access Manager, AWS Shield, Secrets Manager, Cognito, WAF. These are things that address the protect function of the NIST CSF. Detect, Guard Duty, Macie, Inspector, Security Hub, detecting those anomalies out there, detecting those risks that are being solved by your AWS services that are provided for security. And then respond. So automation, CloudWatch, Systems Manager, Lambda, investigation, things like CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Health Dashboard, and Route 53 can be used to respond to security incidents. And then recover. Obviously, things like S3 and Glacier, you can recover your data so that responding to an incident or a compromise, that data is stored and recoverable. So this slide kind of reinforces what we just saw on the previous slide. The services and tools mapping out to the NIST CSF functions. And the items in red are what we're going to focus on today. So config, control tower, organizations, security hub. We're also going to talk about the CIS benchmarks, time and allowing. So let's go take a look at AWS organizations. So I'm going to take my little cheat sheet here, and I'm going to jump into my console here. So AWS Organizations is a great tool if you have a large number of accounts. AWS Organizations does multiple things. And let me jump in there so I could show you an example of the AWS Organizations dashboard. So I'm in the master account, and you can see that account here is signified by a star here. And I have multiple accounts below that's within my organizations. So organizations does billing consolidations, but it also has some security aspects to it. It allows you to create organizational units and apply what are called service control policies. So back to that governance. I've had that situation before where governance teams are asking us, hey, how do I control this AWS account that this group is using? And they want to put a bunch of services in there, but we haven't vetted those services yet, or we don't approve of them using those services. AWS organization security control or service control policies is a way to enforce access to various services within AWS. So again, looking at this, there's multiple accounts within my organization. I talked a little bit about organizational units. So the root is currently not in an organizational unit, but there's 2 organizational units created called core and custom. So within these, you can apply different policies to these different organizational units. And there's a reason these names are here for core and custom. And I'll explain a little bit later why these names are there. Let's move to service control policies. So service control policies are enabled here within organizations. And I could look at different service control policies. So if I come in here and to look at details, it's telling me that this JSON file is putting restrictions around whatever OU that service control policy is assigned to. So this is basically a JSON file of showing you, it looks very similar to an IAM policy of things that can and can't be done within that OU. In this case, this service control policy is set up automatically by Control Tower, which we'll visit. I also want to mention that there's some advantages for creating accounts within your AWS organization. In AWS organization, it creates some automatic roles that allow you to access the member accounts below. This is very handy when basically administrating a large number of member accounts. The other thing that organization does, it also allows you to give permissions to various services to perform tasks within those member accounts. So as you can see, I have things like AWS config and CloudTrail enabled so that the appropriate roles are created within the member accounts of the AWS organization. But you can also invite accounts into AWS org. So if you have existing AWS accounts that you need to address and to remediate or to bring into compliance, you can invite accounts into your AWS organization. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk a little bit about Control Tower, since I mentioned that a couple times. So Control Tower. So a lot of organizations, large enterprise, are struggling with the sprawl of AWS accounts, and that's where AWS organization comes in. But they also have a issue establishing those accounts and putting the right guardrails in place. So AWS provides AWS Control Tower. So there's some great information if I come to this page that tells me there's 2 organizational units available within my organization, and there's 3 shared accounts. There's a native cloud directory for single sign access, as well as 20 preventative controls and 2 detective guardrails. So where did these 3 shared accounts come from? So when you use Control Tower, it will help create certain accounts that you need, such as an audit account and a log archive account. Let's look at the audit account here. So here you have the audit account created within AWS Control Towers, and you see that there's 20 preventive guardrails in place and 20 detective guardrails in place. So let's take a look at those guardrails. So within AWS Control Tower, you have different behaviors. You have prevention and detection guardrails that Control Tower puts in place. So things like disallow deletion of log archive. If your member accounts are allowed to delete your log archives, you're definitely going to be out of compliance. There's going to be no ability to audit your AWS accounts and to see what occurred within your AWS account, and so on. One of the cool things about these guardrails is you could see that the prevention is usually an SCP that is applied. So if I click into this guardrail, you can see that service control policy taking effect at the organizational unit. So if I click on this service control policy, it'll give me details of what exactly it's doing. So it's denying a delete bucket here. For guardrails that are detective, you could see that those are AWS config roles. And here you can see that there's a config role that checks if your S3 buckets allow public read access. So that's one of the great things about AWS Control Tower is once you create accounts within AWS Control Tower, it applies those guardrails for you, and it maintains that compliance within those accounts. I'm going to check to see if I wanted to talk about a couple other things. Moving on here. All right, well, that'll work for that. Let's go back to AWS and we'll go back to my slide deck. All right, so AWS specifically, those cloud accounts that we've talked about in AWS, there's a lot of different configurations that you can have out there with all the different services. And so how do you check all of those services into what baseline? So the CIS organization has produced the AWS Web Services Foundation's benchmarks. And basically, these are numerous checks that will check against AWS and to see that you have the appropriate configuration. So I'm just clicking on my notes here. And I do have some latency. So there's over 100 different benchmarks. There's ones for GCP and Azure. We're focusing on AWS for today. And there's different levels of controls within the benchmarks. There's L1, which are practical and prudent configurations that you should have in place, or L2 for higher security environments. So they cover most of the essential domains like identity and access management, logging, monitoring, networking. So they're going to look for things like root credentials, password policies, MFA in place. They're going to look to make sure that you have CloudTrail, CloudWatch enabled, S3 access logs, VPC flow logs, and so on. So it runs through all these checks. If you're new to the AWS or the AWS benchmarks from CIS, one of the things to look for is the appendix in the back of the document. It's a rather large document, and we'll go through the reasons why it's a large document. But the appendix is basically a checklist of all your best practices that you can enable and configure within your AWS accounts. So just throwing this out there in case anybody's new to the CIS benchmarks for AWS, this is an example of one of the configurations. Check 1.2. Ensure that multi-factor authentication is enabled for all IAM users that have console passwords. So it's telling you here, hey, MFA adds an extra layer of protection on top of a username and password. With MFA available, the user signs into the website, they'll be prompted, and so on. It gives you a rationale on why this configuration is important. Also, it's great for auditors. So if an auditor was going to check against maybe AWS accounts that you've provided, an audit could come in and check to see if that's the case. So it tells you right here, go into the console, select users, see if the MFA device or password columns are visible, and so on. And it also gives you the CLI commands, and that's cut off in this slide so that I could fit that there. One of the great things, it also shows you the remediation process. So if you don't have MFA enabled for all your users, it gives you a step-by-step remediation process to enable MFA for your users. All right, so every enterprise has a big budget. Maybe you don't have a big budget. Big budget items such as Prisma and Dome9, Caverin, and other tools that check your cloud security posture. And that's why they're called CSPM tools, Cloud Security Posture Management Tools. They'll go out and check those CIS benchmarks for you, and they'll give you a dashboard. But there is something out there free that you can use. And for example, Prowler. This is a CIS-based hardening tool, and it'll run those checks for you. So moving on to Prowler. Here you could see that there is a GitHub website for Prowler. And it basically tells you how to set it up, the dependencies that it needs to run, and how to run it. You basically add your keys, and you can run Prowler against your environment. So it's a rather long process, but I thought I'd just show it being executed from the command line here. So here you see, once my screen stabilizes, that I'm executing the Prowler binary and outputting to CSV and HTML report files, or HTML report files. So once I execute, Prowler will use my credentials to log into my account, and again, latency, and it'll start doing those CIS checks. So this is supposed to look really cool with lots of data flying by on the screen. Again, latency is hitting up my plans. And so now Prowler's running those checks for the CIS benchmarks, just as a third-party enterprise tool would, such as Dome9 or Prisma. Another thing I wanted to mention about the site, they do give some great screenshots of those reports that I was talking about. So here's an example of the HTML screenshot that shows the CIS benchmarks and the compliancy against those. Moving on, let's talk about AWS Config Aggregator and Security Hub, or AWS Config. So jumping back to the console, I'm going to pull up AWS Config. So a major issue with compliancy is demonstrating the resources you have, whether or not they're compliant with a framework, such as we just saw with the CIS benchmarks, and so on. So AWS offers some services that could help you in that area as well. So let me jump into AWS Config. Running into the AWS Config console, it basically it stores all the information about what happened into your AWS account. So here you can see that there's a config dashboard, and there's different rules that are, or checks that are in place that are doing checks, and it's telling you the compliancy against those checks. The aggregated view is for example, if you have an AWS organization and you want to see all of your accounts within one dashboard, here you see the multiple accounts and the non-compliant rules that are kicking off security findings. So back to that NIST CSF discussion, one thing that's really cool about AWS config is that they have these conformance packs in place, and you could deploy those against your resources. So if I click here, you can see that I have deployed the NIST CSF conformance pack, and it's doing those checks against what would be a proper configuration to meet the NIST cybersecurity framework. I apologize for that. So let's look at this conformance packs again and see what other things they have available. So if I click here, deploy conformance pack, and I cannot talk, use sample template. Here you can see that they have a ton of conformance packs. So 853, NIST 853, just scrolling down here, best practices for EC2, FedRAMP, low, FedRAMP, HIPAA security, load balancing, and so on. So these are checks that can be done by AWS config for you, and you could look at a dashboard to see where you're at on that compliancy with those different frameworks. So moving on to Security Hub. So here, Security Hub is also very similar to those third-party tools that I've mentioned several times, and I'll jump in here. So Security Hub uses various services from AWS, such as AWS Config Recorder, to populate and to find findings within your AWS account. It also uses things like GuardDuty, Inspector, Macie, Access Analyzer, Patch Manager, and Firewall Manager to pull in findings into Security Hub, and so that you could check your compliancy against these different standards. And so, for example, here I have the CIS AWS Foundations benchmark, the one that we were talking about earlier, and where I was showing that there's different checks and different remediation processes for that. And so here you can see CIS 1.14, ensure hardware MFA is enabled for the root account. So I was looking at that earlier. I'm like, hey, I got MFA enabled for my root account. This is calling for a hardware configuration of the root account, not just the software configuration of the root account. So this would be a demonstration of a finding that is against the CIS benchmarks for AWS. And then they have things like insights, where they use multiple findings to give you a situation that can be remediated within AWS. So moving on to my slides. One thing I wanted to talk about here is the fact that AWS Security Hub is integrated with many third-party security tools. So, for example, a recent project that I've been working on, as well as Thomas, has been setting up provisioning of accounts and attaching those accounts to different third-party security tools, and in this case, the QRadar SIEM. So this is an example of the architecture that is needed for that to occur. So AWS config is sending findings to Security Hub. That is being sent to a Lambda function that then sends those findings to a CloudWatch log group and then forwards them to a SIEM. Actually, a SIEM is scraping those logs, I believe, in this setup. I get mixed up with Splunk sometimes. So there's a large number of third-party security tools that do integrate with Security Hub, and this is a great way to get those findings to your security guys, and so that remediation can occur within your AWS accounts. So at this point, I would like to invite Thomas to talk a little bit about a project that we've worked on, where we're actually implementing those guardrails that you've seen, similar to Control Tower, but we're doing it for a client in a multi-cloud environment, and we do have a demo of that. Thomas, would you like to share your screen?
No, we can keep it on this side. I don't think we're going to get to the demo because of time. I have a hard stop in 3 minutes. Yeah, there's just a lot of information here. So, but what I can do is do a little bit of talking through it. Basically what we've done is we've stood up what we're calling a guardrail engine. We have an internally branded name that I'm not allowed to disclose at the moment due to legal reasons, but it is composed of Go and Python that creates an account, an AWS account. It then creates an Azure Enterprise application, and that handles the AD auth piece, allowing it to integrate with the existing client's AD authentication from Azure. Additionally, we have modularized the application of over 40 guardrails, security guardrails, through the use of Terraform. So we maintain item potency and state, and then we can turn those guardrails on and off through that application. The demo takes around 10 minutes, and I just don't have the time, and I apologize for that. Yeah, no, it's a good
Thank you very
presentation.
much. And I get very talkative, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I know. I will say, whoever is jealous of the ceiling fan in comments, I'm moving to Wisconsin because I have to run a ceiling fan in November. So
yeah, and I should probably mention in Arizona, ceiling fans are mandatory. It gets like 118 degrees Fahrenheit here, so.
Yeah, we're very jealous of the heat in Florida, but I'm sure when you have it every day, it's not as fun as me going on my summer vacation there. Cool. All right. Well, Thomas, I know you have to jump off, but I'm going to just bring Dean in as well. Jason, if you've got 5 minutes or so before the next session, we'll just ask a few questions if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Brilliant. All right, everyone. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
Great. So thanks for the session, Jason, and covering the frameworks and some of the tools available in AWS. I'm not super familiar with NIST myself, so that was really useful to have a look at that. I'll just bring up the chat here and see if there's any questions in here. There is one question here from Fotis. I'll just bring up the screen so you can see it. Are there any benefits or advantages over control tower and landing zone? Can you see the question in relation to accelerator? Yeah.
I do. I don't have a really good answer for that. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I believe that control tower is around the organization where landing zone may not necessarily be, but I don't have a great answer for that.
No worries. I have a question just while we wait for some other ones to come up. You were showing Prowler, and you were saying, this may take some time to run Prowler. I think it's a great tool. I've seen a lot of security experts using Prowler in the field, specifically with AWS, and it's super extensible. How long have you found that it typically takes to run Prowler? Is it the kind of thing that you can run in a serverless function, or do you need some kind of, do you run that locally? How do you run it regularly? Yeah. CloudWatch event, is it possible to run in a Lambda function? Does it run too long? Do you need a Docker or a Fargate instance, for example, to do that?
I'm not sure how long it would take. I run it locally on my VM, and it usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes on a single AWS account. And really, Prowler is open source, and I've really used Prisma and Dome 9 for similar reviews of the CIS benchmarks. So.
Right, got it. And I guess it depends how many checks you enable. I believe Prowler has the ability to just really dive in on those checks that you want to look at. So maybe you could potentially run that in something like a Lambda function if you could get that time down to something acceptable. It was cost effective. Cool. All right, there's a question from Matt Lewis on crypto. I think it's in relation to the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA. Talking about crypto shredding and bring your own key. I was wondering what your views are on using customer managed keys with AWS generated key material to avoid the operational risk managing key material outside of AWS, where you see many clients bring their own key. Do you have any experience around that, Jason?
I believe that the CIS benchmarks call for customer keys to be used within the services of KMS, but I really don't have a response to that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll just read through the questions, see if I can help answer
Yeah.
it. But I know Matt, so if not, we can. I can take it offline with Matt because I know Matt is asking this question quite well.
Yeah, those are great questions. I was expecting those, but yeah.
Cool. Bring you a key. Yeah, we'll take that one offline, Max. I think I've got something for you, but I want to make sure I validate it before I say it on a public stream. What my recommendation is. So I'll get back to you on that one, Matt.
So I mean, you can have AWS manage the key where you're changing the key material within those keys. I've never really done that myself, but yeah, you should be able to change the material within the keys, and the keys can continue to work within the applications that you're using. So.
Cool. All right. So yeah, there's a question that's caused a headache for someone in their organizations and touches on some of the services you spoke about. How do you make a decision on to use cloud native security tools or adopt third-party tools like Prisma or Dome9 and Security Hub versus Prowler, I guess, for CIS benchmark, that kind of stuff?
I would just say that the third parties tend to be experts in the field, and for example, Prisma is bringing a lot of different features to their product. For example, they have purchased Twistlock. They're also doing some things around IAM analysis, as well as bringing those benchmarks in. So Prisma and Dome9, they can do a lot of features that are not exactly easy to do within the AWS services, such as Security Hub.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm obviously biased because I work for AWS, so I like the managed services approach, of course. But obviously, our partners, you partner with these companies, these third-party solutions, and there are some really, really great security vendors out there that are supporting and bringing additional capabilities to the platform. But one of the things you spoke about was IAM analysis that I used to, I was really interested in for a while was Protego, who did. They analyzed your Lambda functions to look for least privilege. And actually suggest least privilege IAM policies. So there's something additional that they can bring to your cloud platform. So it's what I typically look for in third-party vendors. They were actually acquired by Checkpoint. So if you're interested in that, that's a Checkpoint product now. I don't think it's called Protego anymore, but you can find it if you search, go to the old Protego website. So yeah, I think that's a good point you touch on. These vendors often bring a different perspective and something new that maybe isn't native in the platform.
Yeah, it's called Checkpoint CloudGuard Serverless Security now.
It would make them really long, wouldn't they? They'd go from like this really trendy name to like 5-word.
Someone in marketing definitely thought of that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
If anyone wants to check it out, I've posted a link in the chat. Protego did some pretty cool products before they were acquired. Yeah, that IAM analysis stuff is really cool.
Awesome. All right, well, we're like kind of 1 minute over, and I think we're through all the questions. So, Jason, I just want to say thanks for taking the time to present at the event. And yeah, thanks for your time. And if we have any follow-up questions or anything, we'll send them your way. Any feedback we get, we'll share, of course.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Next.
Yeah, so next up, we've got a talk based on a slightly different colored cloud provider, as we tend to like to mix things up and be agnostic here at Cloud Security London. So we've got two great speakers coming up for this talk. We've got Olivier Subramanian, who is an ex-colleague of mine who used to work at Microsoft. So he's done a bunch of work in the kind of governance security field, around a lot of it around DevOps and cloud, ton of experience in that space. And he's going to be joined by Alex Brightmore, who has got a bunch of experience in containerization, CI/CD. I actually read in Alex's bio that he's done production grade Kubernetes. So I don't think anyone else in the world has ever done that. So has anyone got Kubernetes running in production? I don't know. I joke, but the I'm a
EKS. It's called EKS.
Oh, Azure Kubernetes Service. Yeah, you're pronouncing your E's wrong. Anyway, the joking aside, I'm sure people are running Kubernetes in production. I just I'm just yet to see the light, I think. But yeah, there we go. Yeah, so without further ado, I'll bring Ollie and Alex on to introduce themselves and fire away with their content on Azure landing zones and security and governance.
Cool. And I wonder, you're going to share your screen and I'll add it to the stream.
Yep, I'm going to do that just now. There
Great,
we
awesome.
go. Let's just check if that's the right one. Yep. There we go. Cool. Right, good evening, everybody. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Evening, Ollie. Hello, everyone.
It's quite fun co-presenting, but in different locations. So yes, so as Dean was saying, we're going to give you a little bit of an Azure look. So landing zones are a key sort of piece of work that we at Contino have been doing a lot of recently, and it's certainly an area that Microsoft is pushing with its CAF and enterprise scale solutions. So we're going to look at the sort of security and compliance best practices, but really look into the tools that you can get out of Azure that allow you to sort of create that security and compliance lens on your landing zone. So let's move on to introduce ourselves. So as Dean said, I'm Ollie Subramanian. I'm an account principal at Contino. And I joined Contino, it's nearly 2 years ago. Prior to that, I was a cloud solution architect at Microsoft for 3 years. And that was my sheep dip into cloud, or my, where I got my expertise in cloud. And as Dean was saying, actually, I led the, as my little side project, I led the Global Azure Security Champions, not team, but community while I was there, which sort of hopefully will allow me to speak with some experience and knowledge to you guys today. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Alex Brightmore. I've even put the same shirt as my avatar on, just for added effect. I joined Contino about 18 months ago. Was previously at Ford Motor Company, and I've been focused on Azure projects throughout that time. Multiple clients in public and private sector, focused on a wealth of different cloud native and also third-party tooling integrations. So yeah, hopefully some of this knowledge and customer experience is going to be useful to some of you guys.
Great stuff. Okay, so for our agenda, so we've done our little intro. I'm just going to quickly just reaffirm what we mean by a landing zone. Talk a little bit about what the threats are, why are we interested in security of a landing zone, and then I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to sort of go into the deep dive into Azure policy, security center, monitoring, management groups, and RBAC, and then we'll just recap at the end. Now, there are a lot more things that we could talk about, but these are ones that are sort of close to our heart, and that they reflect a lot of the work that we're doing with our customers at the moment. So hopefully this will be interesting. So let's kick off and just sort of talk a little bit about what a landing zone is, and a lot of you hopefully will recognize that a landing zone, it's essentially the sort of like the building blocks that you can put in place and then deploy, extend it out and deploy your use cases into it. But what you want to try and do with your landing zone is have sort of a common point of ingress and egress, a common point to connect back to your on-premise network, and then apply sort of common services within that, such as logging and monitoring. And within Azure, you can also do things like put your compliance layer in there as well. So you can put centralized controls in place to apply across any of the application layers that you would then deploy afterwards. Some of the things that I like to sort of think about around the landing zone are things like your networking. So a very common model for landing zones is the hub and spoke networking model, where your hub is that central point at which all connectivity to the outside world, outside of your cloud, will take place. And you have your spokes where you would deploy, an application or a group of applications of common type, and then any communication into and out of that spoke or that VNet would be through the hub. So a very common architecture model that you can use a pattern there. We can put in a lot of sort of like the common operational aspects within that hub area, and as I was mentioned before, things like the monitoring, things like identity and access management controls, which although are pervasive across the cloud, you can start to apply things like controlling who does what, which we'll talk about in a bit later on. That's not part of the hub. That's just part of your core elements, building blocks of Azure. And I like the pyramid because it does remind me a bit of the Maslow pyramid of needs, a hierarchy of needs, and that actually, if you want to go to an enterprise, scaled Azure solution, then your basic need, the enterprise scale, the bit in the red box, it is that core element of the platform, and those common services, and then a compliance or a control layer that you do centrally, so that you don't have each of your development teams going off and applying or interpreting the controls and the governance and the security rules by themselves. So let's, talking of security, let's just move on to talk about the threats. So if any of you have seen me present before, you might recognize some of these threats, and it's actually sort of from a piece of work I did with a colleague at Microsoft. So my first statement there, which is a question in some respects, is we having worked in public cloud for the last 5-6 years, I strongly believe that it's a safe environment to put your workloads, but it's only as safe as how you design it and build it. So having a landing zone gives you a way of putting those controls in place in a single point, rather than having to apply it to each and every solution that you deploy on a piecemeal basis. If we think about some of the threats that are out there, so I've classed them as sort of internal threats and external threats. So we have a bad company system admin. So let's say your operations administrator is just a bit pissed off and decides to play dirty, kill a few servers, corrupt a database, or maybe change the encryption keys and then not tell anybody. We need to be protecting against that. We have a bad company tenant. So this is where you've got something happening in your overall tenancy that impacts one or many services, or that impacts others within the public cloud. So you're essentially as an organization will end up being penalized because you have impacted others and made a nuisance of yourself without realizing it. Then we've got the cloud, the cloud providers themselves. So as Steve Dean will tell you, you can't trust any of the cloud providers. They have the keys to everything, and we've got to make sure that's controlled and we limit access. And the same applies to an employee. That could be anybody within the whole supply chain. Then from an external perspective, you've got those naughty neighbors, the people that are also running in Azure that somehow might be able to get through a back door or even a front door if you're not protecting yourself and do something naughty. We have our eavesdroppers who are monitoring that traffic coming in and out. Always a concern from an Azure perspective until fairly recently, with all of the public IP addresses needed for a lot of the sort of PaaS and SaaS services. So many customers are very concerned about that. What do we do? How do we manage that? I don't want people to know what my IP addresses are. They'll start to hack into my services and see an open port and all those sorts of things that security managers worry about. And then, of course, we've got a malicious external party. So who knows what country they come from these days? But China is always a common country that if you talk to any CISOs, they'll tell you they're constantly attacked by China. I think Russia's pretty active these days as well. They're probably active over in the US with the election happening. So all of these are threat actors that we need to consider and protect against from a landing zone perspective. And now I'm going to pass over to Alex, who's going to take us through some of the using some of the tools within Azure, how we can protect ourselves against these actors.
That's great. Thank you, Ollie. Thanks for the overview, and it's good to recap on the threats as well. So Azure policy. Next slide, please, Ollie. Azure policy is essentially a tool to help enforce organizational standards and assess compliance at scale. So comparing the properties of any resources in Azure itself with business rules or the JSON policy definitions that Azure has. And there are hundreds of these, so there's hundreds of built-in definitions which can actually be customized per enterprise requirements or per client requirements and managed as an internal library. So for our clients, this is pretty killer, because having the ability to manage security, governance and compliance, and also allowed resources, so looking towards the cost side of things at scale, while customizing them for their own requirements and what those policies actually do, it gives a lot of confidence in an Azure landing zone from the get-go, really. So just to cover some key kind of aspects of that, we've got security, so having built-in policies for Azure supported for regulatory compliance, so security benchmark, CIS, NIST, PCI, DSS, and ISO 27001. But also custom policies that can be created for any company standards. So that leads nicely into governance, which is to enforce any logging or monitoring settings across all resources that are deployed into the landing zone environment. And that can be a kind of platform core level, or also for the customer workloads as well. So making sure that everything is logged and monitored as it should be. Naming standards. This is quite a big one and a nice one to implement. So making sure that everything is named correctly, easy to find, and also tag. Deployment regions, so where the client actually is going to be using Azure. Typically for our clients, that's perhaps UK West and or South. So restricting down to just those locations for the whole landing zone platform. And also tagging, so coming back to budgetary sort of tagging or for owners of resources internally. For compliance, a restriction of any public endpoints, routing, traffic filtering, or NSGs. These can all be managed for the base resources or default rules by Azure policy. So the use of TLS on storage accounts, for example, or use of private link for services, VM disk encryption, and any required VM agents or extensions that the client has. You can kind of cover all of this with a proper policy implementation. And finally, cost, so allowed resource types, what customers are going to be able to do within the platform when they start consuming it, the landing zone, what they're going to be able to deploy, play with, and actually develop workloads on. And also the SKUs of those resources, so VM sizes, for example. We don't want somebody deploying the biggest VM in the world and consuming all of the budget that they have in the enterprise. So restricting those down, again, by a policy. So that's a little overview of what policy is and perhaps some of the reasons why we want to implement and use it. Next slide, please, Ollie. Let's take a look at some of the policy objects themselves. So there's three main ones, which is a definition, which is basically the core policy rules and requirements expected, and the actions which those policies will enforce. So we can have two different modes for that. So all for every single resource, or index for taggable resources only. We also have initiative definitions. So that's collecting policy definitions into a set, which is really more tailored towards achieving an overarching singular goal. So a collection of single definitions in a more manageable set, and an assignment. So a policy definition or initiative that has been assigned at a particular scope within the management group hierarchy, which we'll cover a little bit later on, to ensure that those compliance, governance, and security rules are enforced in the right places throughout the platform. Next slide, Ollie. So in terms of scopes, there's a few best practices to be aware of, or certainly what we've seen in clients and recommend using. So defining policies as high up in the hierarchy as possible, management group hierarchy. So managing them at a high enough level that the platform team can access, modify, and create those policy definitions, so the rules, at the correct scope. But assigning those as low down in the hierarchy as possible. So if we look to a customer who maybe consumes the landing zone resources and has a spoke, we want to make sure that the policy is assigned down to their scope, so that they fall in compliance and adhere to those policy rules. Not scopes, so that could be child resource groups, individual resources, or even a whole subscription. They can be specified as exemptions, and we're going to have a little example of that a little later on in the deck. Policy actually overrides RBAC, so even if somebody is in a subscription owner, they'll still fall under the same enforcements, which are assigned at a higher scope. So that inheriting down through the management group structure means that even owners of subscriptions will still have those enforcements in place. Next slide, Ollie. Okay, so there's various different effects which policies can enforce. So the first one is, so just to say, least restrictive on the left and most restrictive on the right. That's pretty important. So you want to find a balance between allowing consumers of the landing zone to learn, deploy, and develop their workloads, while also having the enforcements in place that adhere to kind of the platform rules and the enterprise requirements. So it's finding the balance of the two, and you can do that with these various conditions and effects of the policies. So disabled, the first one, so that won't evaluate any of the resources for compliance in the policy rule. There's auditing focused ones, so generating warnings in the activity log, but not actually failing any requests for deployment. Audit if not exist, which generates, again, an event in the activity log if a related resource doesn't exist. And then we look to more of the restrictive ones, so appending, adding any of the policy defined sets of fields to a request. Deploying if not exists, which is a really great one. So deploying a related resource to the policy if it doesn't already exist. So this could be tags, for example, if resources are not tagged correctly, or logging settings if resources are deployed without proper diagnostic and logging settings into the environment. Policy can actually deploy those and trigger if they do not exist, and modify. So adding, updating, or removing defined tags from a resource, so another way to manage the tags. And finally, most restrictive is deny. So actually generating an audit event and failing any request against that policy. So an example of that might be if a public IP was trying to be deployed to a virtual machine, there will most likely be a policy in place for customer spoke that says, no, we don't actually want to do that, certainly in lower environments. So actually denying that request straight off and not allowing that deployment is a really useful tool to have. So next slide, please.
Just before we move on, Alex, I just got a question. So with our current customer that we're working on, are we, how are we changing the assignment across the delivery lifecycle? So we got different things in dev versus production.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it comes back to that least and most restrictive and how you want to allow people to grow and use and learn on the platform. Certainly for our current client, they're fairly new to Azure, and we want to give them the ability to get to grips with it and deploy resources while also falling in compliance. So there's really a mix at the moment of deploy if not exists, audit, and deny for really core stuff like the public IP that I mentioned, or removal of any default routes, for example, that are core to the networking of the platform. So in terms of a spread of environments in production, you would want certainly a lot more deny, because you want to really lock down that environment and those services. But as we go back lower in the environment stack, you'd want to look to allow a bit more grace with actually remediating anything that falls out of compliance instead of just straight out denying it.
And it's still the same policy code, isn't it, that goes all the way through? It's just how it's assigned is based on.
That's correct.
On
it's just the effect that changes on the policy itself.
Cool, great stuff. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay.
Cool. So remediation. This is a really cool one for me. An automated kind of remediation of anything that falls out of compliance can only be a good thing, right? So policy can be instructed to run tasks based on those deploy if not exist effects and modify operations that we just spoke about. So any resources which fall out of compliance are going to be updated and brought into compliance, whether they're at a management group, subscription, or resource level. So again, inheriting those policies down, making sure that all of the necessary settings on resources are always deployed and everything is always in compliance where possible. So the examples, maybe deploying diagnostic settings, as I spoke about, to any resource in the platform which is not deployed with those settings from the get-go, or modifying the tag values, and that's going to use that modifying effect, so keeping that billing and owner visibility across the landing zone. So remediation tasks we'll also see in Security Center when we cover that a little bit later in the deck. But this works really well, and we're implementing that on our current client as well. So triggering any remediation that that falls out of compliance, just to give the confidence that everything will always be in line with those core policies. Next slide, please, Ollie. So what does that look like in terms of code? This is a Terraform example on the right there of a definition for whitelisting regions. And this is actually a custom definition that has been cloned from the Azure built-in policies. So as I said, there's hundreds of those, and they're all kind of open source and out there to grab. But you can tune them to the requirements of each enterprise. So we've got this as a deny with a list of regions allowed as UK South and UK West. So that's the regions that the current client wants to deploy into, and only those. Anything outside of that, we want to deny those deployments before they ever happen. And this is applied to any landing zone resource. So you can see on line, what's that, 5, the definition scope. Sorry, line 6, assignment scope. That's actually been assigned at a really high up management group level, at the org level. So that will always inherit down to any of the current or future management groups that are deployed. So when more customers start to come on board and more workloads are hitting the landing zone, everything is always going to be adhering to this policy of only UK South and only UK West deployments. Anything outside of that, deny. So that's just a little snippet of Terraform code there. Obviously, you can deploy these via ARM as well, but managing that lifecycle via Terraform and having the benefits of state and keeping all of those assignments and definitions in line with your core code base is a pretty neat thing. Next slide, please, Ollie. Of course, and this is a deploy if not exists example. So again, we're passing in custom values. So we made a clone of that Azure built-in policy. And you can see we're actually passing in some assignment parameters. So we've got our core log analytics workspace ID, our storage account for archive logs, and also the event hub authorization and event hub to pass login data through to. Again, this is assigned at a high level so that any resource that's deployed in the platform inherits this, which means ultimately all resources are going to be having diagnostic settings and logs sent to the central and right locations. So hopefully nothing is going to fall outside of that. And if any resource is deployed, I don't know, let's say a VM without diagnostic settings, the policy will pick that up, trigger, and deploy the diagnostic settings pointing at the correct Azure kind of monitoring tools. So yeah, it's a really powerful thing to define your policies at a kind of high level and trickle them down, because you're not so tasked with doing that in all of the resources in the code, although that should always be the case. You've got a fallback that actually policy is going to pick that up and remediate if there's any mistakes made. Next slide on. So let's think about how that looks in terms of the deployment flow. This is something I put together in a kind of finger in the air scenario, but could well happen. So if we look at non-compliant on the left and compliant on the right, that's in terms of the resources that are deployed. So let's take the A-team customer developer, very inventive name, I know, is trying to run a deployment of a resource group, a virtual machine, and a public IP. So policies are in place and are inherited down from a customer management group. So that sits just above their spoke subscription level. And that's inherited down and has a deny effect on the public IP deployment. So there's a policy in place that we don't want any public IPs on VMs in customer spokes. The next thing actually is that a policy inherited from a level above for a deploy if not exists remediates missing tags that were not actually deployed on the resource, the VM resource, or the resource group itself. And actually what that's going to result in is the non-compliant public IP resources denied deployment, so that never goes into existence, but also the missing tags can be remediated for the resource group in the virtual machine. So hopefully that gives you a kind of idea of how policy would work in kind of more of a real world scenario and deployment. But you're kind of covered at every point, no matter whether there's a resource which shouldn't be deployed, trying to be deployed, or actually there's just some settings missed, you're going to be covered. So it's a pretty powerful tool, policy, when implemented correctly. Next slide, Ollie. And actually you can do a lot more than you think with policy. I know I'm banging on about it now, but it's really powerful, especially in a landing zone scenario where you've got kind of a hierarchy and customer workloads. So it can be leveraged to deploy base resources as well, and enforce deny policy effects on those base resources. So for example, deploying default NSG rules or user-defined routes that are kind of key to the networking of the platform, although you can very well do that with Terraform itself and kind of abstract that and manage it via Terraform code directly. Actually, policy can make sure that those default networking settings are deployed and not changed. That's true also of enforcing any storage settings for TLS or HTTPS across all environments, and denying any deployments which don't align to that. But also continuous auditing. So with alerting via Security Center and the visibility that Security Center gives, and also tied into Event Hub for any critical events that happen against these policies, you've got a pretty all-encompassing method of managing compliance and governance and security at scale. So it can do a lot more than people often think or deploy policy to do. So it's good to take some of that onus out of the kind of Terraform resources side of things and actually bring that more into a policy managed set of effects.
That's very cool. So we've got a couple of questions. I think, Matt, your question's been answered. So it was a question around in terms of the events that get here we go, perfect. The events that are raised where policies are being broken, does that go directly into Sentinel? And I can't remember. We haven't quite done this on our current project yet. We're probably a few weeks too early for this particular question. I think it goes into the activity log, and then that goes Sentinel. Once you've configured that to take anything out of Azure Monitor, then you will get it into Sentinel. I can't remember if it would automatically recognize policy breach as a security event or not. It might be, I'm not sure if it's a switch on or if it's something that you have to create that query directly format. So, and then we have another question just around the remediation. So how quickly does it take place? So my understanding of how policy works is that it actually applies essentially at the API layer. So as soon as you are putting any sort of request in through the API, the activity is interrogated by policy, and that a remediation would trigger in immediately. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, it is. To a point, I'm going to caveat that because actually a managed system identity needs to be in place in order to facilitate those deployments. So there's probably a small delay between the deployment, certainly for deploy if not exists. Deny, I mean, is instant, like you said, with the API. But for those remediation of actually doing deployments, there may be a small delay in that.
Yeah, okay, so it's actually where it's then triggering a command to do it, take an action. Yeah, okay. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. Let's move on to Security Center.
Cool. Okay, Security Center. Next slide, Ollie. So, Security Center is intended to be a single pane of glass, in air quotes, because nothing ever seems to work out as a single pane of glass, but it does a pretty good job. And it's a Microsoft hosted security and compliance set of dashboards, really, for monitoring any infrastructure, any compliance, so all the policy that we just talked about, having a view of the entire tenant, all the management groups and subscriptions and how they fall within or out of that compliance, but also a secure score against any vulnerabilities. So Microsoft Security Center continuously sort of analyzes the infrastructure in the platform and workloads to recommend any security remediation that you can do actually directly in Security Center itself, some of which you can trigger from Security Center pretty quickly, so you can get that quick feedback loop on any remediation tasks. So as we've discussed, you've got the regulatory compliance standards, which are continually assessed across subscriptions, alerting for critical and high severity, and that is configurable, landing zone events. So that's helping to reduce your potential attack exposure. So limiting the exposure to any threats by using access and application controls to block malicious activity. So you're providing controlled and audited access to VMs only when needed, just in time. And that's all monitored through Azure Security Center as well. And also continuous configuration analysis for container workloads. So that includes AKS, ACR, and any VMs that are running Docker. So although Security Center container and VM analysis gives a great amount of kind of insight and recommendations, you would still have the potentially discrete container security tools and certainly VM image hardening in place to secure those workloads end to end. But what Security Center does is allow you to have a comprehensive view of basically everything in your tenant as to how it falls within security, compliance, and governance kind of rules. Next slide, please, Ollie. So I'm going to talk about the kind of tenant-wide view, and this is really to look at all of your subscriptions in a single dashboard and understand what your posture is, kind of more of a high-level scale. So certainly when workloads grow or the landing zone has a lot of consumers and a lot of customer spokes, this is really key to be able to look at what your overall posture is and what remediations you can do to address that. So subscriptions are visible in each tenant Security Center instance. So it's a tenant instance. So if you've got multi-tenant, you'll have a Security Center in each tenant. So a whole landing zone can be monitored and assessed from that single place, Security Center. And again, that's including all of the benchmark compliance scores, but also there's recommendations on increasing your security and compliance posture. So I know it's really tiny, but just at the bottom of that image there, you can see that there's an indication of how how much your security posture can increase by completing these remediation tasks that are recommended by Security Center itself. So it gives you a real nice graphical interface of, okay, this is what my overall posture of a landing zone security looks like. And as I said, you can remediate a lot of these directly from Security Center fairly quickly as well. Next slide, please, Ollie. So given we just spoke a lot about policy, it's really helpful to be able to see all of that in a single place as well. Although it's all in the Terraform code base, certainly on the client we're working with, and managed that way. Being able to view your management group structure as well as all of your subscriptions in a single place, as you can see on the image on the right hand side there, is super useful, certainly for kind of the platform team who are looking at the overall kind of platform security or policy posture. So they can be viewed at a multi-level, so you can really drill down into what a certain subscription looks like in terms of policy compliance. And this policy kind of dashboard also influences the compliance dashboard metrics, so assessing all of the subscriptions and resources that fall under policy or encompassed by policy. Next slide, please, Ollie.
Just a quick question from me, and I think this is right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but this is also a useful place if you've applied a set of industry standard policies. This is a way of checking your compliance against those visually.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can actually drill down into those policies and view what, first of all, what they have in them, so what these policies are actually doing, and also look to kind of navigate any missing compliance areas as well. So yeah, totally.
Yeah, because there's a number of blueprints that you can apply to Azure, such as like PCI DSS or some HIPAA ones. Well, there's a whole raft of them, and you know, this is a good check to say, actually, you know, are we still compliant? That continuous compliance approach to how you work with your cloud products to maintain that security.
Definitely.
So let's move on to the. Sorry, Alex.
Just on that as well, in terms of auditing, I mean, this is super useful, right? Being able to view everything that's going on. If ever there was an audit, you've got all the information right there. Yeah. Cool. So another great feature is monitoring of any threats and alerts via Security Center. So threat protection really detects any high or critical security events across the whole landing zone. And you can configure it to alert on certain categories of threats. So again, this is looking to reduce the exposure you have to anything like a brute force attack, and can continuously be exported to Event Hub as well. And that's facilitated by policy. So you can export all of these alerts that are coming up in Security Center through to Event Hub. So if you've got an external integration, let's just say Splunk, right? You can actually, Splunk can pull those alerts that are coming directly from Security Center into kind of the main external tool. Also, automatic data classification for Azure SQL. So you've got assessment and analysis of vulnerabilities across Azure storage, which is super useful as well. So this is pretty all-encompassing, really, and gives you a good idea of potential threats, while also alerting on those as well. So this is really useful for enterprise clients where they need to know this information in real time because, you know, it is critical. So the integration certainly is really helpful there.
Yeah, so Security Center is definitely one of my favorite services within Azure. And certainly when I was at Microsoft, I spent a lot of time talking to my customers about it. But in the picture you've got here, we've got like events and then alerts. So one of the things that it does for you is essentially look at correlating different events that are associated to show that that's an actual attack that you need to take action on. And as I'm going to guess it was Dean because I don't think Steve would know, but you can actually then take action by clicking through, and you know, might be able to even do remediation just by clicking through on the screen. Now, for all of us sort of, you know, coders who like to do everything by code, that's maybe sounds a bit off using the GUI, but But for those poor security people and operators, it might be a bit of an easier tool to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate the little dig there.
Yeah. That's all we wanted to say on Security Center. We'll talk about monitoring next, Alex.
Yeah, let's. So next slide, please. So I've called it the Azure Monitoring Arsenal because there's a pretty good spread of tools that are available to facilitate monitoring, diagnostics, alerts across an Azure landing zone platform. So and I will come to this in a second, but a central log analytics workspace, that's going to enable you to have fine-grained retrospective log querying against anything that's happening on the platform resources. And you can scope that down to via RBAC to allow platform or customer teams to have different views or different access based on the information that they're required to view and consume. Event Hub, so that provides all of your alerting on any platform events. And as I just mentioned, obviously that can consume Security Center alerts as well. And the Event Hub events can integrate with external tools in multiple different ways, which I'll cover in a couple of slides' time. Azure Monitor, which is for monitoring the infrastructure, application performance, scale, and any usage, resource limits, with automated actions also off the back of those. And then finally, those Security Center dashboards are another element to this. So being able to view everything that Security Center offers in a single place, and also export those alerts to wherever they need to go via Event Hub. Next slide, please.
And am I right in thinking that we can use policy to sort of manage access to each of these?
We can, yes. Certainly on our client at the moment, we're probably going to do that via RBAC just because you can be more granular with that, and certainly give access to a particular set of data in just a reader capacity, for example. But certainly, yeah, there's no reason why not, I don't think.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about RBAC in a bit, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
So, to centralize or not to centralize, we've seen a lot of different implementations across different clients, or I certainly have, and things can really get quite complex pretty quickly, and it can become an overhead to manage, and you end up having a person or a team who's just managing your your logging and monitoring resources essentially, and making sure that everything is consumed from the right place to the right place. So this is my opinion and what I've seen work, and certainly the way I go forward. But centralizing the logging and monitoring where it's possible to do so for landing zones is a consolidation of effort in my mind and resources, and actually allows for easier integrations with those external tools and bulk export of any alerts or diagnostics. Similarly, if you wanted to just have an archive data storage account, you could have that in a single place to drill down into if required, as opposed to spread out across n number of spokes, each having their own respective, data or logging data. So each subscription does not necessarily need discrete logging resources. As we discussed, access to those core centralized resources can be controlled by RBAC very effectively. So you could actually have a customer being able to just have reader access on their data in a log analytics workspace, as opposed to being able to view the whole platform or another customer's data. You can segregate it down to that level. So that removes some of the need for having each subscription with their own workspace. And actually that can result in a lower cost if set up and centralized correctly. And audit, resource limit and security alerts configured from a central location helps to give a more holistic, certainly at a first glance or without drilling down too far into the hierarchy, a holistic picture of the landing zone in a kind of core location.
Yeah, I think, I agree that having a centralized lens or a way of looking at all all of the different logs really helps when it comes to problem resolution and root cause analysis. But we were talking about this earlier, that not most, but certainly many of our customers seem to have many different logging solutions all across the park. And moving to cloud is always an opportunity to sort of limit that and rationalize, although not everyone is rational when it comes to moving to the cloud. But let's move on before I get a bit too punchy.
So yeah, just quickly again on those external integrations with tools such as Splunk or Datadog. So Event Hub and Azure Monitor are relatively simple to integrate with those tools. So that can be done via public-private endpoints or even specific integration apps in some cases. So I know Splunk has got apps for integration with Azure Monitor and Event Hub, which you can add to it. You can also just poll Event Hub, for example, for events via its endpoint. The key question for a lot of our clients is usually where are we storing those logs and how are we connecting in. So recently there was a proposal for just dumping everything into a storage account and pulling from a blob endpoint as required, right? So that for me is not making the most of the tools that are available to you on Azure and segregating down your alerts, logs, diagnostics in the correct way. Just archiving everything to a storage account for later usage is probably not the right way to go. There is times when clients want to completely avoid any internet routed traffic at all costs, certainly into those, if you're coming from a multi-cloud perspective, being able to traverse ExpressRoute and go that way, or for on-prem resources and consume via a kind of protected route. That's certainly an approach we've seen quite a lot as well. So there's ifs and buts around this, but certainly for the integrations, there's a lot of possibility there with getting that in a central external location.
And we just got one question that I'd like us to just see if we can answer now. So does centralized logging replace the need for Splunk or SIEM? And does it cost less? So I think from my perspective, just having all the logs in a central place doesn't replace the need for a SIEM. The SIEM has a specific purpose of helping you really understand the security lanes across your environment. But what I would personally do is I would use Azure Sentinel instead of shifting logs out into another service such as Splunk or QRadar or whatever it might be, just because you're already getting the benefits of it being integrated from day one. In terms of costs, I don't know now off the top of my head. I'm sure that the security team, Microsoft team will tell you that it would be cheaper, but I think the proof is in the pudding there. I've not done enough, run enough Sentinel implementations to be able to compare the two. So let's move on, Alex, to management groups and RBAC.
Sure. So let's jump to the next one. Okay, so we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but management groups are effectively a level above subscriptions, so allowing you a more efficient management of compliance or security, more of a scale. So grouping subscriptions logically, for example, for customers versus platform subscriptions, grouping those together allows for bulk RBAC assignments and subscription management, but also applying policies and controls to any current or future management group that may be deployed through that parent management group inheritance. So inheriting down to any potential future spoke, for example, or customer workload, making sure that those policies and settings are always enforced, as mentioned. So it's best to manage any RBAC definitions higher up the hierarchy at a kind of more platform level and assign those at lower levels for customer workloads, similarly to policy. Next slide, please, Ollie. This is a rough kind of sample or indication of a management group structure. There's likely a lot more of these management groups that will be in a, a full organization structure, but just to give you an idea of having a tiered hierarchy. So you've got your tenant at the top there, and a root management group, but the organization will sit under that. And from that, you can separate out into dev, non-prod, prod, or whatever environments are required, and further separation down into platform or customer. So that's where that inheritance and separation of where and how policy is applied comes in. So for example, for an allowed regions policy, you'd want that at the organization level, so high up. Whereas for something more restrictive, like a deny on certain resources, you might want to just apply that at the customer management group level and inherit that to any new management groups or spokes that come online. Next slide. So RBAC roles can be defined and assigned at different scopes. So ideally, you want to have the least access at the smallest scope required for any user, group, service principal. And as your built-in roles are usually perfectly sufficient for everything you're going to need, there's tons of them. They span pretty much all resource types and most use cases. So rather than having the overhead of managing custom RBAC roles and definitions, and having potentially an overhead when you come to scale it, actually the built-in ones should be sufficient. I see Ollie smiling.
Yeah, sorry, it's just making me laugh. The number of conversations that I've had with customers, stating exactly what you said there, but do they listen?
No, well,
but I mean, it is a good rule of thumb to try and use the built-in roles, because they're maintained by Microsoft. You don't have to worry about any sort of maintenance overhead as you scale and grow. And when things change within the Azure ecosystem, you're not having to then revisit things because it's a custom role.
Yep, for sure. And just a note there on think about actually relying on policy more, where custom roles might have been used before. I've got a brief example just after this slide of a custom role, but actually, a policy can do a lot of this for you. So having a deny effect on a public IP resource, for example, might be equivalent to actually denying access to deploy that resource in the first place via RBAC. So you're consolidating into policy as opposed to having that split between kind of role-based control and policy. So this is just a brief example of a potential RBAC example. So this is a not action. So on the right there, we're basically saying, okay, for no networking resources is this customer or anybody with this role assigned going to be able to modify, change, delete anything on the core network resources. Anything else, absolutely fine, because the scope is everything except networking. Again, policy can achieve the same thing with deny or do not deploy if not exist effects. So that's really something to keep in mind. And that takes us to the final slide, which is this holistic approach. So you've got to balance the freedom to develop while having security compliance standards enforced. So policy, as we've discussed, can be used throughout the hierarchy. Onboarding to Security Center for each new subscription is automatic per tenant. So any new activity is onboarded into that Security Center. Set up dashboards and monitoring and alerting. Core resources such as your platform networking default rules and routes shouldn't really be removed or messed with. They should be managed by a platform team or cloud ops team. So custom role definitions, as we said, is one way to achieve this, inherited through to each vendor spoke, and policy is another way. And through properly scoped and limited RBAC, everyone accessing the landing zone should have the access they require and nothing more. And I think that wraps us up.
Yeah, that's it. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to tell you all about what we've already talked about. But I mean, I think one thing I would say is that we've really only sort of scratched the surface in terms of what you can and can't do when it comes to securing your landing zone. And you might have noticed that there's been a lot of talk about policy, and policy is very, very powerful. And I think we're going to see more and more usage of it as we go forwards. So that is us. Thank you all very much for listening. Hopefully you've all found it interesting. Were there any other final questions?
I think we answered most of them. Bit of a conversation in there around Seam Tools and Sentinel, and someone,
Yeah.
John, finally reminded me of Sumo Logic, obviously.
Oh yeah, of course.
Thanks to our sponsors.
Much better than Splunk, because of course it's cloud based. So we like that.
All very valuable partners to Microsoft, Ollie. Yeah.
Oh yeah, very good.
I've been on the PR training, you see. I know how to answer these questions. No, thank you so much. Really informative and a great job answering the questions as we went through as well. Some interesting ones there from the audience. I think, the summary for me is that, you should secure. There's so much you could do, but just get started, right? Secure your environment, use landing zones, using policy and these tools that are at your disposal. Often free as well, right? Are a great place to kind of get started, right? A lot of these tools aren't charged for. Some of them are, but some of them aren't, right? So nice to be able to use those. Thank you so much, Ollie and Alex. I really enjoyed that. We now have the quiz, so you can hang around and join the quiz, I guess, if you want. You know, I'm not sure if you qualify for prizes or not. I'm not really sure. Really.
Well, it depends what they are. What are the prizes?
Oh, you missed the prizes. We announced them earlier, so we'll recap on that for our quiz takers. I got a bit lazy on the prizes, so instead of specific products, we are giving 50, 30, and £20 in Amazon vouchers
Oh,
for first, second, and third place. So you can choose your product that you buy with the vouchers if you are successful in the quiz.
Steve's going to do a little dance while I get my screen ready.
Yes. So with that, I'll drop you two out the stream, but stick around for the quiz if you like. And thanks again for speaking tonight.
yeah,
Thanks everyone for listening, and cheers.
So here we have the quiz. So if you haven't been to one of our events before, then you need to scan that QR code or enter that link. Jim's been here before because he's already in the quiz. And once we've got a few people in there, we'll give people a couple of minutes.
That's me in the quiz. I was testing it for you. I'm leaving. I'm not eligible.
There's you. Leave the quiz. You're cheating. There you go. Steve's gone. Steve just also posted the link into the chat. If you can't scan the QR code or you've got any problems with that, feel free to join. Jim,
just while people are joining the quiz, just one thing is we were made aware of today a good offer available from one of our organisations that we follow and support, called homeschool.dev. They provide training courses in cloud technologies. They have some great courses. They have a serverless in production course, or production serverless course from Yang Kui, who's a very top AWS community hero in the serverless space, very well renowned. They're offering 30%. Is it, Dean?
Yeah, they're offering, any courses that are bought in November, they're offering 30% off. And yeah, they're a great company. It's great people. They're trying to bring the best homeschooling environment. They had to kind of pivot a little bit with their startup given COVID towards the beginning of the year, but they're trying to really give them the best homeschooling. So there's a good mix between actually having a teacher and homeschooling and learning your own pace. And you get access to experts and top people like Yan Kui. I mean, if you're in the AWS serverless space and you don't know who Yan is, then you've been living under a rock for a while. So some really good teachers in there. So yeah, if you buy your course in November, then you get 30% off, and they're good friends of ours. So yeah, head over if it's of interest.
And just so you know that you may not be completely obvious because I'm one for closing pop-ups, but when you go to the website, it will pop up, enter your details for 30% off. So you just need to do that and you'll get the discount if you book a course for January. All right, well, looks like we have a good few players, Dean.
Yeah, we've got 12. Some people aren't in the quiz, but yeah, we'll go ahead anyway, shall we? All right, I'm going to click the button to start the game, and then we'll start. So if anybody, do my quiz host thing. The aim of the game is to answer the questions correctly and quick as possible. If anybody has used Kahoot before, this is very similar. This is a free open source ripoff because we don't have the budget to pay for a Kahoot license. So this is something I found on GitHub. It works an absolute treat. So the question will pop up. There'll be 4 colors, one associated to each answer. Smack the answer that's right, and then from there it will get points based on the right answer and the quickest answer. So
you do that before you put it in the chat.
Yeah, don't put the answer in the chat. I think someone did do that before, didn't they?
Yeah, but I guess they answered it first, so they got the fastest points.
Yeah,
anyway.
Kahoot was a bank. Yeah, it was a bank. They must have pivoted. I think it's with a H.
It's with a K.
Right. It's with a H, with a K, not Kahoot, was it? Right, let's start the game.
Coots is still a bank as well.
So we're just talking about Azure Policy. What can an Azure policy not control? Network security groups, operating system patching, Azure storage security, or continuous auditing? You have 15 seconds to answer. Picture of Ollie there on the escalator. That's what he does. Run the Contino offices. 2 left to answer. Get your answers in quick. 5, 4. Oh, they're all in. There we go. So you got that right. Everyone got it right, but Fotis was the fastest. So yeah, it was operating system. Of course, we can't do that. That's not our cloud resources, right? Someone was listening. Right, next question. This week, FireEye published details of a new threat actor that it calls UNC 1945. But which Unix-based operating system did they find the zero-day vulnerability in to gain access to corporate networks? Solaris, IBM AIX, 3BSD, or HP UX? If you hadn't read those already.
Hopefully they pressed the button before you read them. Or they won't get top of the
Still
leaderboard.
two of them last minute.
Mandrian, I think the company is part of FireEye.
Somebody didn't get it. Oh, that was a good mix. The actual answer was Solaris. Steve, you found this one, right?
Yeah, there's a company called Mandrian, I believe is their actual name. They're part of FireEye. And they found that these threat actors were using a new zero day that they weren't aware of in Solaris to get into.
Nice.
That are using nice old Unix systems. My first operating system I worked on, Solaris.
So Fotis has obviously got a zero day into my computer because he's got that one right as well. He must be checking out the answers. I'm sharing the right screen, right? I'm not sharing the answers, am I? Right, let's go next question. Which video conferencing platform launched end-to-end encryption for calls last week? Was it Cisco WebEx, Zoom, GoToMeeting, or Amazon Chime? All right, we've got a few seconds left. 13 answers. That's great because there was only 12 people in the quiz before. Someone must have joined late.
Darryl was asking for the link. I think he might have missed the first.
No, Darryl, did you get the link? Did you get in, Darryl? There you go. Zoom. Most people give Zoom there. Fotis still leading. Stop looking at my paperwork.
It's only available for the native clients, not in the web browser. End-to-end encryption in Zoom. So
nice. I think Mike there. If that's the same Mike might have got a prize last time. I think Mike's raking in the prizes. Next question. Amazon RDS supports what type of authentication? Password-based authentication, IAM authentication, Kerberos authentication, or all of them? Padlock through a CD authentication?
Wow, you've really stretched for that graphic there.
I searched for. I don't actually know what I searched for. Actually, I use like these open. You know, these 3 image.
Hopefully not Amazon RDS. That would be the worst image.
Yeah, I didn't search for that. Yeah, the answer was all of them. Amazon RDS supports all of the above. So
10 points in
it's
it.
close. Mike might be taking the lead here. Jim could get 3rd place. There's only 7 points in it. It's all to play for as we go into the next question. British hacker Nathan Francis Wyatt. He was sentenced to 5 years in US jail for blackmailing US companies, but he was initially arrested in the UK for hacking which celebrity? Jennifer Lawrence, Pippa Middleton, Ed Sheeran, or family favourite Stormzy?
When was he sentenced? Recently?
Yeah, recently. Oh, the answer. A lot of people got that one wrong. Mike's took the lead. The answer was Pippa Middleton. 2 years ago, he was arrested for breaking into the iCloud account of Pippa Middleton and exposing 1,000 images or something. But he actually never got charged because there was lack of evidence. And then he was later arrested and extradited to the US for blackmailing US companies and sentenced last month, I think, to 5 years. So,
bit of a trick question because the Jennifer Lawrence stuff was.
That was the
high profile. Yeah.
There you go. Next question. At Microsoft Ignite, the threat protection features in Azure Security Center got rebranded, but what is its new name? Was it Azure Defender, Azure Secure Analytics, Azure Threat Hub, or Azure Hacker Crackdown?
I don't know which one it's not.
I think they should call it Azure Hacker Crackdown. Sounds like a National Crime Association operation.
Better than Crackdown.
That is true. Yeah. Oh, so it was a mix there. The answer was Azure Defender. So they integrated all the features of there's a suite of products, Microsoft Defender, which was the Windows Defender kind of stuff, and then that encompasses Windows Defender and Azure Defender, which is now the threat protection features in Security Center. So yeah, Mike's running away with it here with 90 points. Fotis got a second, and still very close between Hamza and Jim. Come on, Jim. I'm not. Did you win a prize before, Jim? Let us know in the chat. I think you might have done, but yeah. Or you're always clinging in there at third or fourth place, so you deserve it, man.
Maybe we want Hamza to win then. Balance it out.
Yeah, he's had one before we do.
I'm vouching for you, Hamza.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Mike is in the lead again. Right, next question. The hit mobile game Among Us has been in the limelight for a series of hacks. But what US politician went viral for streaming them gameplay of Among Us on Twitch? Was it AOC, Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, or the Donald?
I actually don't know the answer to this because you came up with this question. Some of these people are too busy to play Among Us.
Jim got the Unicorn Project. That must have been when we had Mark Nunakovan speak, right? Yeah, that was right, Jim. So it was AOC. Yeah, most people got that right. Mike's run ahead there. This game Among Us, has anybody played it? Let me know in chat. My son, he's 14. He's playing this with his friends like all the time.
You're an imposter, right?
Yeah, there's
Someone's
like an
imposter, right?
Yeah, so AOC streamed playing Among Us, and I think she got like 430,000 live viewers on Twitch while she was playing the game or something like that. So
Twitch is very scalable, you see.
And since that, they've actually been they've got attacked even more now, since with spamming attacks actually ruining people's games. 1.5 million people were affected by a spamming attack apparently.
Is that our last question, or do we have one more?
This is a good point. We don't know.
Next question in the app, so I'd hope.
Yeah, so I think there's probably another question. So let's see. Oh yes, Jason presented with Thomas earlier on AWS security. But if you were listening in the intro, which state was Jason from? Was he from Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, or Alabama?
I think it's called Arkansas.
Well, it's not spelled like that.
Definitely Arkansas.
Yeah. Oh, people were listening. Oh, he's nicked it. The last Arkansas. I like that, Jim. I like that, Jim.
Jim's dropped down. Oh no, Ollie's come third.
How do you get there? Arkansas. I like that. Yeah, software as a service. I like that. InfoSAS, Arkansas. We're there. So there, I think that's it. We're going to finish the game. We'll see a little leaderboard. Oh, my monitor's going to power. There you go. So we've got Fotis, who is the winner, Mike, and then Ollie. We'll decide if Ollie is entitled to a prize or not. He should be. I don't think you know any answers. He's shaking his head in the background here. I'm not even sure if I can see who got fourth. I'll tell you what, we're going to wipe Ollie from the prizes. Ollie isn't allowed a prize. So we'll give Fotis, Mike, and whoever came fourth. If you know that you came fourth, send us an email at hello@cloudsecurity.london, and we will get your answer.
Press the back arrow. I bet it doesn't tell you.
You want to press the back arrow? You think this is going to work?
Yeah, I've screenshotted it. No, it's gone. No. All right, we'll rewind the video and make sure we know who came fourth.
Of course, yeah, we recorded the video, so we'll know who came fourth. But email us at hello@cloudsecurity.london, and we will sort out your prizes. I think it was 50 quid for the first one, £30 for second, and £20 for third. And thanks to InfoSAS again. InfoSAS give us £100 to give away for prizes each event. So thank you to InfoSAS. Cool. So yeah, well, congratulations to everyone on the prize. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you so much to our sponsors. We're back in January. We normally do the first Wednesday of every month, but in January we're going to do the 20th of January, I believe, because and it's all on the meetup page, cloudsecurity.london.com, because it gives people to get over New Year and come in. So we're going to do it a little bit later that month. So yeah, we can't wait to see you then. Everybody have a lovely Christmas and holidays. Keep in touch with us on Twitter and LinkedIn and wherever we keep in touch, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.